My name is Rod and this is the Orca Boat Shop. So we're going to be working on a new set of videos here on building the Black Pearl Greenland style kayak. This is episode 1 in the construction video series of building the Black Pearl, designed by Bjorn Thomason. First step will be to trace out and cut out all of the forms. Now it's very nice in fact that he's given us full-size patterns rather than most plans would just give us half and you have to flip it over. I'm going to be able to get most of these patterns out of this piece of particle board. It's just a leftover piece. It's going to be a quick build as far as forms go. I have no use for the forms afterwards, so I'm just going to dispose of them. What I will do is just use some carbon paper. I have another sheet of the board in case we don't get them all onto this one, but the idea is to lay down some carbon paper here. Start tracing out patterns. Now the other nice thing is that being that it's really hard chine, these are all straight surfaces for the most part, other than the deck curvature. So I'm going to be able to just lay these out. I'm going to get as many as I can on here. We'll start with form number 1. I will need the center line. Let's see how we did on those two. Missed a line here, but that's okay. Make sure I label all of these. Alright, had to do number 2 again, only because completely missed drawing in the water line, and there's no way I'm going to get that paper back in the exact same location, so that is wrong. 1, 2, we'll move on to number 3, and then we'll continue on and do all of these patterns on this board and the next board if necessary. Cut them all out on the bandsaw. Now that I have the forms cut out, it's time to set up my strong back. I have this strong back set up at 12-inch spacings, which is kind of standard in most kayaks, canoes that I have built over the years. However, being that these plans are from Europe, the spacing's metric, and the spacing on centers of the forms is 41 centimeters, which really is close to 16 inches. It's 16.1, but there are 12 forms in here, and if I accumulate that 0.1 over 16 inches, it'll come out a bit longer. So I need to take my blocking off that I have used for many boats and respace it out to 41 centimeters. You know, I just like to be able to put it back together and put it away for the next one. Next step is to set up the risers, all relative to the center line, which would be the horizontal center line, and the tops of the risers will correspond with the water line on all of the forms. So I start by setting up the 2 at the ends of the boat. Now I'm not doing number 1 or 12 because those forms are so small, I don't even know how they're going to be held on there. But with that taut string I can line up the rest. It's pretty simple. The way it works is I line up the center line down the center of my riser with the center line on the beam, and lift the whole riser up and down until it touches the center line on the top, the height being the string and the string being the center line, lining up with the top. All the pieces have large, wide slots in them. Makes it easy to adjust everything. I can slide this riser back and forth with the wing nuts and the washers. I can lift it up and down. If the beam is a little bit off level, I can always lift any of these risers up to increase the height of them. Can't go any lower, obviously, as sitting on the beam, but I'm pretty confident the beam is pretty solid. Now just sight down there, and it doesn't look like any of the risers are lifting the string anywhere, so that's good. And all the risers are resting on the beam. I can take the string off. To attach the forms to the risers, I just need to drill some holes. I'm just going to hold this in place, center line, horizontal, vertical, and just make a rough mark of where I need to drill a hole. And that's going to give me some room for adjustment. So I've taken my forms to the drill press, punched a bunch of holes in so that I can put in the carriage bolts, washers, wing nuts. I'm lining up vertical center line, horizontal center line with the top of the riser. And I'm really cranking them down here. I want to get the heads of the carriage bolts pulled into the particle board. There's an interesting little note of detail here on the lines drawings for the Kayak, and it shows here an extra strip to reinforce the shear line, important when rounding over the deck to hull joint here. So it appears that, you know, if one would had a strip of cedar in there, that another one would be added, or the deck would come over that way. I don't know. What it doesn't show on the actual form patterns is that notch being cut out. So I'm going to consider that I'm going to take a notch out of all of the forms here at the shear line and insert maybe a 1/2 by 1/2, what we would call a shear clamp, and do it similar to what the designer Steve Killings does on the Bear Mountain boats. And that would assist in attaching the deck to hull, because this strip will go in but not be glued to the hull. It'll just be in there when building the hull, gets fiberglassed over. Then when they start planking this deck, that first strip at the shear line will get glued to that. When the deck comes off, that shear clamp will come out with it. When the deck and the hull get reattached after all of the finishing of the inside, then I would just apply some thickened epoxy into this area, put them to, and literally glue the hull to the deck, and then can round over corners and apply any fiberglass tape as needed. I take my square and I line it up here with a 1/2 inch mark on both edges, 1/2 inch on the ruler there, 1/2 inch on the ruler there, and just make a little reference line there, and I cut that out. When I lay a 1/2 by 1/2 in there, I'll do the planking on this side. When I flip the deck over, or flip the hull over and start making the deck, I'll just shave this down to that shear line. I'll do this for all of the forms and then cut those notches out. These two pieces of red cedar will be used as the inside stems. Now what it says regarding stems is they are approximately 12 by 50 millimeters and up to 1 meter long. So these are a little bit longer than 1 meter. Attach these to the strongback in the correct height above the strongback as shown in the line's plans. In determining the stem height at the very bow of the boat, I'm assuming we measure from baseline to approximately that point there. It says right there, but it says stern height. At least I'm pretty sure that says stern, not stem, because on the other drawing it says stem height, stern height, but there's no marking there, so I don't really know what that's referring to unless it's on both of these pieces of paper here. See, now it says stem height here, above the strong back I show lines, and in cutouts in molds 1 and 2. Okay, that's mold, or sorry, 1 and 12. That's mold 12 right there. I see no markings on here for a cutout. That would be on the hull side, neither that or on the Form 1. And it doesn't show it on Form 1 over here either. So, if I was to just take these two forms and take my stem, which will be coming through the bottom here like so, I could just draw a line that's approximately centered here. It just has to fit inside there, and I got to notch this out so that the inside stem will in fact fit down in that notch. Do the same for the number 1 form. Over to the bandsaw we go. Alright, done that on the bandsaw, and the stem will fit inside there like so. Now I've got my riser holding it all together, and when I put my form onto there, on this particular one, not sure if I maybe just need to trim a little bit more of the riser off, because if it's coming in on an angle it may hit this. So we'll go over to the boat, we'll reset the riser in and attach this form and just see how any sort of stem is going to land. I don't see how that's going to work, because if I bring a shear strip through here, it is not going to contact the stem till 8 feet out there. Alright, if I rest the stem in my notch there and bring the top of the stem, or the bottom upside down, flush with the top here of form number 2, I'm just going to put my ruler on there, draw a line parallel, trim that off so that this stem can come up and butt against form number 2. As I work through setting up the Black Pearl forms and all the strong back, aligning everything, I've got my center line, string line. I have got down and looked at the horizontal water lines to see if they are level, and they are pretty good. So my setup is pretty dialed in at this point in time. I'm also going to be adding, we call a shear clamp. This piece is going to go inside the little notches I've cut. I have just used a scrap piece to make sure that when it sits in there that it's flush on the hull side, because the strips are not going to be glued to it at this point in time, and I'm not running it all the way to the end. I'm basically going to run it from 2 to 11 form down to the back at the stern end, because it's just not going to come into the stem, which I've been trying to work out and figure out. There's limited information on the plans about it. Really, it just says to look at heights about, but I built a Black Pearl before, and it was the same issue, same problem, and then trying to figure out sort of where does the shear strip end at the bow and at the stern. I mean, it's pretty easy to just curve it down if you want to, or lay it level if you want to. There is no definitive, but there are some measurements from a baseline, so measuring the baseline off of the top of the strong back itself. I'm going to tack in, hot glue in the shear clamp in there, because it needs to come out. It's not getting glued to the hull, it's getting glued to the deck, and won't get glued in or attached to the hull, and when the hull and deck are attached later on. Therefore, I think I'm ready now to sort of assemble everything, get my shear clamp glued in, and then move on to actually planking up the boat. Got all my lumber cuts right here in front of me on the floor. Some beautiful clear cedar, a couple of different colors, so we'll make a pattern out of it, mostly on the deck. So the manner in which I have attached the shear clamp to the forms temporarily is to put a little hot glue in behind, tack it in place, and I'm just going to add a little bit more sort of as a bead around here, because this strip is under a bit of tension. And once this is done and set up nicely, then I can cut off the ends at the last two forms. To hold the two small forms at the end of the beam, station number 1 and station number 12, I'm just going to clamp it down with a C-clamp. If it's sitting on top of the beam flush and the center line's lined up, I'll be able to adjust it when we get the stem form in, or I mean the stem itself in, which will sit here and extend beyond. So, and then I can check to make sure that this is a string line, laser line, straight out the end of the boat. Then we shape the stem and start putting some planks on. With the shear clamps in place, it's now time to just kind of look at the whole boat, the structure. Let's just see if everything is running smoothly down there. So look at it from the top, or the sort of plan view looking down, and it looks pretty smooth. Now these shear clamps are 1/2 inch by almost 3/4. Quite a bit of it will be shaved down. So they're pretty stiff, and if they're, we'll push strips into place. The other way we'll look at it is to get down and look at it from the side or profile view. And let's just see if that strip, that main strip, is taking what we call a fair line, a smooth curve. There's not a lot of sort of upsweep or downsweep in the shear line on this boat. So it's a pretty simple line to check, and it looks pretty good to me. Now I can easily undo any of the wing nuts inside here. If things look a little off, I can just undo one of these wing nuts or two, and this strip out here, which is pretty heavy, will just kind of push things into place. But I don't really see at this point any need for that. Considering that there is no end form or stem form to hold the stem in place, I'm just going to drill a hole through the center of this last form here. And then when the stem sits in there, I will lift it up just a bit higher so I can shave this to the contour. And I'm going to put a screw through there, and then we're going to rig up some means of making sure that the end of this doesn't wobble around. Might be best to pre-drill a hole in here. The cedar might split, but really I'm just wanting to hold it in place so it's not going to move around while I shape it to accept the planking that will be coming in down the center line on the top, down the chine lines and the shear line. It's not bad, that's pretty solid. Pretty straightforward to shape the top of the stem here. Just gotta flush it down to the edge of the plant, or the edge of the form itself. Now, as I bring a strip through here and curve it down, it's going to want to lift that up. So I need to come up with some mechanism of holding it down whilst I get some planking. Once I've got a bunch of planks on there glued onto the stem, it should hold it in place. Since I've got a form pretty close to the end of the beam, I'm actually just going to use a wire. I will wrap it around like so. And then we're going to pull it down, and I've got a screw into the end of the beam. And a cup. Ow! That's pokey. That should hold it down while we build. I think we'll stop episode 1 right there. I've got the whole forms all set up. You'll see actually that I've got started planking. We'll get to that in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Hey, give me a thumbs up, will ya? And maybe become a subscriber. See you next time.